Hey all, it's Michael Laxer, editor of The Left Chapter. I'm coming to you from Toronto on May 21st. And, we got to cut right to the chase here. These are dark, dark, and very dangerous days for the Cuban Revolution and for our comrades in Cuba who are facing what can only be said to be the immediate threat of military attack from the American imperialist regime, the utterly unhinged and psychopathic regime of Donald Trump and his wretched henchmen like Marco Rubio, as probably almost everyone watching will be aware. Yesterday, the Trump administration and the U.S. government indicted Raul Castro, the historic leader, remaining leader of the Cuban Revolution, the former president of Cuba, and of course Fidel Castro's brother, for for murder, claiming that he was behind the shooting down of two aircraft in 1996. A case that we will come back to in a second. Um, and of course, uh, this is an incredibly dangerous situation and escalation on the part of the U.S. regime because it was utterly bogus uh, indictment and charges against Nicolas Maduro that led to the attack on January 3rd and to the kidnapping of Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, in what was an outrageous, illegal attack and attempted decapitation of the leadership of Venezuela, and which led to the killing of 32 incredibly courageous Cuban bodyguards and military members who were there to protect Maduro and who fought to the end and intensely against the U.S. imperialist attack on Caracas that day and paid with their lives, gave their lives, sacrificed themselves in an attempt to stop the abduction. And of course, to a certain degree, the decapitation of the Venezuelan regime worked. The new regime is largely compliant with the United States and has, it can only be said to have betrayed its Cuban counterparts, having stopped any attempt to send them oil, although they have actually sent other aid. But this and the rest of the world has abandoned Cuba largely. Only one shipment of oil has arrived in Cuba since the new escalation of the embargo, with the de facto embargo on oil that was imposed by Trump by threatening countries who send oil to Cuba with extreme tariffs. So you have a situation where only one shipment of oil has arrived in Cuba this year, and that was a shipment from Russia. 100,000 barrels came, but that shipment has now run out after having been it's been used up, and again, Cuba is in this terrible position. It's finding it very difficult to leave the lights on. It's having to postpone surgeries. I mean, this is an absolutely barbaric strangling of Cuba. Although, of course, the Americans farcically and hypocritically claim that they are extending an offer of humanitarian aid, humanitarian aid that's only necessary because of the blockade, and humanitarian aid which apparently comes with a whole number of conditions which no self-respecting sovereign regime, let alone the Cuban revolutionary regime, are going to accept. But now we see that this is the same wag the dog playbook, the same manipulation of the media to manufacture both consent for and seemingly a justification for an impending attack on Cuba. So these are very dark and very dangerous days for both the Cuban people and the revolutionaries who lead the country. Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez, Raul Castro, and all of those people who have shown so much solidarity with the rest of the world, who have always stood up, who have always been there for the rest of the world through either Cuban medical brigades or through direct military aid decades ago in Angola and in other cases. who fought internationally against colonialism and imperialism, who fought against apartheid in South Africa. I mean, the Cuban people, the Cuban government, the Communist Party of Cuba, and the Cuban Revolution have been there for the rest of the world, and now it is time for the rest of the world to be there for Cuba in this terribly desperate hour. In the indictment can only be called a complete and utter, I mean, a complete farce. Today on the Left Chapter website, there is an article by Pedro Moran where he talks about the background of these, the incident in 1996 and what led to it. I mean, it did not come out of nowhere, despite the characterization of, the aircraft and the people in the aircraft who were killed as being somehow innocents. That's far from the truth. They had been engaging in provocative acts towards Cuba and violating Cuban airspace for many days and weeks prior to the Cuban government taking action and the Cuban military taking action, and the Cuban government and had warned that it was not going to continue to allow violations of its airspace any more than any other country in the world would. I mean, it's absurd to suggest that they should have allowed this to continue, and it's absurd to suggest that the shooting down of these aircraft constituted murder. And of course, interestingly, no attempts were made to file charges. I mean, first off, the U.S. has no right to file charges against Cuban nationals for something that occurred in Cuba, and I mean, it's absurd. I mean, there is some dispute as to whether or not they were shot down over international water or not, but that's really irrelevant given that that they had crossed into Cuban territory that day, and that these aircraft and flights had done so on numerous occasions previously. So, I mean, that's utterly irrelevant. And the United States has no jurisdiction except one that it invents. This is incredibly rich, coming from a country that has been engaged in the extrajudicial murders of alleged drug traffickers, mostly probably just innocent fishermen going about their business in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. Over 200 of them have been murdered by the Americans in typical gutless and cowardly fashion. I mean, it's an astonishingly gutless and cowardly regime. And you have, now they have the temerity to try to press charges against, decades later, against the former president of Cuba, who at the time was the Minister of Defense, and for what was clearly an act of self-defense, it was clearly an act where they were protecting the sovereignty of their country and protecting their country's territory. As in that article, as he notes, the shooting down of the Hermanos planes on 24th February 1996 was not a crime. It was, as the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States had predicted, quote, a measure intended to defend Cuban national sovereignty, end quote. Had they been planes from Cuban organizations entering U.S. airspace to drop leaflets over Miami, it is certain that they would have been shot down on the very first attempt. Nor was it a military act against harmless, unarmed civilian aircraft. The same planes that were dropping leaflets over Havana could, after all, at any moment drop explosives if they so desired. And this is, it's essential, especially after incidents like 9/11. I mean, it's outrageous and absurd to suggest that countries should allow the violation of their airspace. And it's obviously just a pretext to justify any future violent attack on Cuba and on its leadership and on its military regime and, on its revolutionary regime, on its military leadership, or on Raul Castro himself. So it's an absolutely outrageous and disgraceful act of escalation, profoundly hypocritical and farcical, considering that the American administration, like basically every other previous American administration, is a cabal of murderous war criminals. I mean, after a deeply unpopular war that did not go according to plan in Iran, and with plummeting popular support and poll numbers. I guess the thinking is that Trump is looking for some kind of easy win, although I think an attack on Cuba will be anything but easy for the Americans. But, that's a secondary point. I think the Cuban Revolution, the Cuban military, and the Cuban people are willing to and will defend their country, their sovereignty, and their revolution to the end. And I think it would be, as the president of Cuba has said, it would be a bloodbath, and not just for Cubans, for the Americans involved in the attack. But, Trump is delusional. After what appeared to be an easy victory in Venezuela, no doubt emboldened by that, they went out on this terribly stupid and debacle in Iran. The Iranians bloodied their noses. Clearly, strategically speaking, they have to date lost that war. They keep threatening to start it up again, but so far have not done so. And if they do so, I suspect it will continue to go very badly. The war is tremendously unpopular. It has led to an increase in prices, which has been devastating for the Trump's administration's popularity and for the chances of the Republicans in the upcoming elections, the midterm elections in November. And so, there's a bit of panic going on there. And I guess maybe the hawks in the regime and, psychopaths like Rubio are trying to talk Trump into taking action here, presumably telling him that, they will collapse like a house of cards or something, which is, it's clearly not what's going to happen. But they've been having masturbatory fantasies about the fascist gangsters in Florida for a very long time now. And clearly they are, they think their moment has come, and they are pushing, full speed ahead with clearly trying to establish the grounds for and put Trump into a corner for an attack on Cuba and for a military attack on its leadership. And so, these are very dark and very dangerous days. On the left chapter, you can read both the Cuban government's response, which, of course, rightfully so, was outrage. The revolutionary government condemned in the strongest terms the despicable accusation by the United States Department of Justice announced on May 20th against Raul Castro. And of course, it is despicable. It's completely outrageous. As the Cuban government itself said, the United States government lacks the legitimacy and jurisdiction to carry out this action. It is a despicable and infamous act of political provocation based on the dishonest manipulation of the incident in 1996. And this is unquestionably true. Further, the present Cuban president has rightfully said it's just a political maneuver that's devoid of any legal basis, aimed solely at padding the dossier they are fabricating to justify the folly of a military aggression against Cuba. He said that it only reveals the arrogance and frustration that the representatives of the empire feel toward the unyielding resolve of the Cuban Revolution and the unity and moral strength of its leadership, which is unquestionably true. When you compare the leadership of the Cuban Revolution and of Cuba today to the disgusting, corrupt, psychotic war criminal band of donkeys that's running the United States, none of whom should be in charge of a hot dog stand, let alone a nation. The contrast is astounding. This is a country led by a deeply humanistic a group of revolutionaries brought up in the revolution, internationalists, anti-capitalists, people who even in the most desperate times have shown solidarity with the rest of the world and have made sure that there's still access to free education, free health care, and that no one is left behind in Cuba itself. You contrast that to the deeply corrupt and ugly group of people leading the United States. Drunken fools like Hegseth or Marco Rubio, just drips of evil, nauseating to watch that man on television. The contrast is quite striking, and I'm sure it makes Trump rather jealous that pretty much the entire world despises the man. But certainly don't feel the same way about Cuba and the Cuban leadership. Cuba's foreign minister, Bruno Rodrigo Parilla, he also called it a farce. He said it was the farce of the U.S. government presenting an illegitimate and illegal accusation. And of course, that's true. And he said that we reaffirm our firm support for the Army General, Castro, and our unwavering commitment to the defense of the homeland, the revolution, and socialism. And I believe that unwavering commitment is very real. And it's not just on the part of the Cuban foreign minister. I mean, it's deeply ingrained in the Cuban psyche to fight for their independence, for their sovereignty, and for their socialist project. And they are going to put up one hell of a fight if it comes to that. But we in the rest of the world have to do everything we can to prevent it from coming to that. You can see calls for action in other statements. For example, the Communist Party Switzerland, they put out a very good statement in which they called on the Swiss government to stand up. You can find that statement on the left chapter as well. And there are statements from the Communist Party of Greece, the KKE, where they're also calling on Greece to take action, to take a stand. Here in Canada, where I am, it is incredibly important for us to put pressure on our government, which allegedly opposes the blockade, and which allegedly opposes Trump's adventurism and disgraceful, overtly violent Donroe doctrine imperialism, but has done nothing, hasn't lifted a finger to help Cuba except for a very token humanitarian gesture of a few $1,000,000, which was then couched in all sorts of appalling imperialist and anti-Cuban terms, as if, somehow they were reluctantly handing it over and we're going to have to bypass some corrupt and nasty regime. Well, the corrupt and nasty regime is to the south, it's not in Cuba. And Canada needs to step up and needs to actually be counted for once. Mark Carney, who came to power based on this wave of discontent with Trump's reactionary moves and attacks on Canada and threats to make Canada the 51st state. He campaigned on this elbows up bullshit. Well, he's been nothing but elbows down. Little scared, little bullied boy hiding in the corner. He hasn't done shit to really counter the threat from the United States, and he's not doing anything to do that now. And he certainly has taken no steps to help defend or to help Cuba, which has been a destination for Canadian tourists for a very long time, and with whom Canada has had very good relations and very good business relations. But the Canadian government has done basically nothing to help counter this. And other governments, including in Mexico and Brazil, have de facto capitulated. I mean, they have sent some aid. Mexico has sent some aid, and that's admirable, but has stopped sending oil, has continued not to send oil, even though that's what's most desperately needed in Cuba. It's time for the people in all these countries to stand up and put pressure on these countries and on these governments to be counted and to help the Cuban Revolution. I mean, there are many ways that we can stand up. I mean, sometimes it can feel very powerless. These are very dark days of reaction and, tremendously aggressive American imperialism. But there are still things you can do. You can attend rallies. You can put pressure on the political parties, especially allegedly progressive political parties in your countries, the so-called socialist parties in Western Europe, or the allegedly Social Democratic Party, the New Democratic Party in Canada, the Liberal Government of Canada, on progressive Democrats in the United States. I mean, there are always actions you can take to stand up and be counted in solidarity with the Cuban people, the Cuban Revolution, and no time has it ever been more needed. Also, you can find on the left chapter and a reference to a campaign that was started. It's was started by the WFTU, the World Federation of Trade Unions. It's a campaign that's centered around, a petition for Cuba. It's the Sign for Cuba campaign. If you go on Facebook, you can find that they have a Facebook page that will take you to their petition. I will leave a link to the petition where possible in comments on this video. And, and to the Facebook page and to the petition. That's just one minor thing you can do. People will say that that's not enough. Well, of course it's not enough, but it's something. And everybody needs to do something. Everybody clearly needs to step up and be counted right now, needs to be there for our comrades and friends in Cuba, as they have always been there for us. And it's in these dark days, we need to do whatever we can to express our solidarity for and our love of the Cuban people and the Cuban Revolution, and to express our disgust, anger, and vehement opposition to these actions by the grotesque imperialist regime in the United States, this profoundly corrupt cabal of liars. I mean, it's just shocking. They simply, the group of folks leading that country, they're lying when they open their mouths. That's when you can tell that they're lying. They never speak the truth, and they are certainly not speaking the truth about Cuba. Quite the opposite. It's just been absolutely revolting and disgusting to watch this and to see their lackeys and the various sort of far-right hyenas that they have in their pocket, political folks, backing them on social media platforms, etc. Well, we can counter this. You can speak your mind on social media platforms as well. You can speak up and be counted, and it's time to do so in any possible way that you can. Solidarity with Cuba. I mean, it is the great imperative of our moment and of our time. Never has it been more needed, more necessary, and never has the situation been more clearly desperate since the Bay of Pigs. I mean, it is very clear that the U.S. Is trying to find every possible justification for an impending attack, and we have to do whatever we can to dissuade them from this attack, and whatever minor and major thing that you're capable of doing, now is the time. Anyway, hopefully next time I come to you or that we are talking together, it will be under better circumstances, and this terrible moment will have passed or blown over. Hopefully Trump will do his the taco thing that he often does, and will at the last moment turn away from a violent path forward. I mean, the Cuban government, even without military action, it remains a desperate situation for Cuba either way. But the threat of military action is deeply frightening and deeply unsettling. And again, we have to do everything we can, however small, to stand up and be counted in opposition to the possibility of this terrible thing occurring and unfolding. At any rate, love and solidarity, friends and comrades, and I hope to talk to you again soon. All the best to you wherever you